Hello, everyone. My name is Cody D'Arkland. I look after developer experience at Sentry. We're pretty excited for this one. We are going to jump into a pretty cool AI conversation with some new friends and talk a little bit about how AI has changed the way that they're working inside of their organizations. So in about a moment here, we'll go ahead and get started. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. This is going to be recorded, so you can come back and watch this later if you want to. Again, I'm from Sentry. I'm joined by Dave Rosenthal. We'll do a little intro for him and the rest of the people in a moment. We're gonna guide through this conversation a little bit and talk about AI and the developer workflow. We want to focus on this conversation around like what's actually working. I think last year was a pretty big year and a lot of stuff changed, and so we really want to kind of capture all of that and start to look forward and start to see like, as larger organizations start to adopt all of this, how do things start to shift? So pretty excited for that. Like I said, it's going to be recorded. So if you have to bail halfway through or midway through, you can definitely do that. Come back and watch it. We have people in the Q&A from my team who are willing to answer questions. So if anything pops up that you want specific information on, feel free to ask, and we will do our best to answer those live. So we're about a minute in, so we'll go ahead and we'll kick this off because we do have a pretty action-packed agenda to get through. So I want to make sure we have enough time to cover everything. Like I said, my name's Cody D'Arkland. I look after developer experience at Sentry. So what that actually translates down to is finding the hard parts of getting software up and running and helping people fix those, whether it's inside of Sentry or inside of their platform. So it's a pretty cool gig. Love to do it. I've been here for about a year. But a lot of my background is in both startups, and I spent about 10 years in a major utility doing everything from software to infrastructure automation. So no stranger to large and small organizations. Dave, love for you to kick us off. Tell us a little bit about you at Sentry.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. I'm the CTO at Sentry. I joined Sentry a couple of years ago after a career mostly starting companies and running startups. So I've worked with sort of teams of all sizes, from us in a garage up to big teams. So it's exciting to be at Sentry and kind of working to build a tool used by so many developers as this kind of era of AI hits us. It's kind of crazy times.
Awesome. Yona, you want to take us away too?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. So my name is Yona Rahko, currently working as a principal engineer at Unity. Been doing software engineering for about 15 years or so. Been at Unity. Well, I was there for 7 years earlier, and then I took 2 years working in generative AI companies. And then I very recently returned back to Unity. So I guess back in where we started, right? And I've done like management kind of roles, VP of engineering roles. And then but most of my career I've spent as an IC, just overseeing larger architectures and so forth. So yeah, that's kind of my wheelhouse.
Awesome. Jose, what about you?
Hi, Jose. I'm a principal scientist at Adobe. I've been at Adobe a little bit over 3 years. Before Adobe, I worked at Twitter and Google, primarily focused also like Jonas and IC, and on basically building consumer-facing product and features.
Awesome. Well, really excited for everybody. I think what's really cool about this group is we have a bunch of different kind of representations of company size. And so I want to unpack that a little bit just to give some more context around like the lens that we're looking at AI theories. I think, when we all talked before this call and started planning things out, we all use AI in different levels. But I think things start to change a little bit when you look at how things are adopted on an individual level versus organizations that start using it across different teams. And with everything that changed in 2025, there was a lot of things that shifted in here. And so I think this is going to be the year where organizations start adopting it a lot more. And I think it's just good framing to think a little bit about what teams look like. So Dave, I'd love to start off with you and take a little bit of a step back as far as like hosting this. Talk to me a little bit about like Sentry as an organization, our size, and kind of your lens on the way we're using AI and building with it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a couple things here that are relevant. One is team size and how many people are contributing to some project. Probably the other is like the age of the code base. They probably go hand in hand, you know what I mean? But Sentry is about a 400-person company roughly, and we have a core engineering team of about 200 that's dedicated to whatever, slinging code and working on the product all day. But then we also have a bunch of other people within the company that are all using AI tools and even like coding up little things. Like our sales team built a little tool the other day with Claude Code. So the other thing though is Sentry's been around for a little while. So we have a code base that's probably 10 years old, and obviously it's newer in places, but it's been interesting trying to figure out how to get AI tools to sort of work for sort of big, more legacy code bases versus like just the hey, I spun up a project 2 weeks ago and it seems to be going well and there's not that much debt yet. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's the background though for the the environment we're trying to make it work in.
Totally. Awesome. Are you feeling good about AI adoption internally? Are you feeling like we're making? I think everyone's making strides on this. How are you feeling?
I think so. We were just actually the founder of Sentry actually just built a tool to help us monitor adoption across the company, which was pretty cool because nothing really existed. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely that kind of like Ziff distribution of users. You know what I mean? There's that one person that's like cost us a lot of money. You know what I mean? And maybe we should talk about that, right? And then all the way down to there's probably like a third of the team that's like, I don't know, touched it once or twice, but really hasn't got into the workflows. But I think the people in our organization that are kind of at the tip of the spear, trying to incorporate, Claude Code, Cursor, all of these tools into their daily workflows. I mean, they're starting to get what I would call some like major wins, of being able to, oh, wow, that really got built fast. You know what I mean? Or that was a 2-year-old bug that, we've kind of been putting off. It was in the backlog and somebody just like speed ran fixing it like in 20 minutes. You know what I mean? And so this is probably a year for us where we really make a concerted effort to kind of like help train everybody up on the workflows that are working and that are starting to get, success in the company. So we're hoping for adoption that, is a little bit more uniform probably in 2026. Maybe both on the low end and the high end.
I think it's an interesting thing. Like obviously Sentry being very much like a developer tool software company. I want to talk to Yuna a little bit about Unity. So like this is a very different organization, a different kind of engineering. And maybe it's really not at the end of the day. Tell me a little bit about how organization size overall of Unity, obviously thousands of employees. Let's talk about like how is the engineering team structured? How is AI adoption looking for you guys? How are you looking at it?
Yeah, we have like 2 larger engineering organizations. One is more focused on the editor, which is the gaming engine itself, and then we have another one working on services and ads. So that's kind of how we're organized. Beyond that, like engineering organizations sits separately from the product and design organization, but we basically make cross-functional pods out of the teams, right? Beyond that, I think like we used to be way more hierarchical before, and I think like we were focusing more on like just having a lot of talent, but recently we've been focusing on having more senior talent and then using AI tools to actually have high productivity in a sense, right? What else can I say? I think beyond that, I think we have a lot of technical, like more senior principal engineers at the company as well. And we are expected to kind of crisscross and applesauce across the different organizations within the company to kind of connect the dots and be that connective tissue as well. So that's kind of how we're organized. I guess in terms of the AI adoption in general, I think there's like both top down and kind of bottoms up approaches. So when it comes to, and then in infrastructure tooling and stuff in general, when it comes to like larger investments, often those are pushed top down. Let's say, what is the infrastructure provider? So if we're discussing kind of like investments in the order of millions, usually that gets pushed down top down. But often, like engineers are also encouraged to kind of try different tooling, and then if they like it, for example, write an RFC. More senior principal engineers will then take those ideas and sponsor them to get them pushed up to procurement and eventually to use at a wider company level. So that's, I guess, a brief description.
I get Jose, bring us home. Tell us a little bit about organization size at Adobe. What you're working on, how you guys are looking at it.
Yeah, so I think obviously we're quite different than some of these, given that Adobe's over 40 years old now. So the way that the organization is broken down really comes down to the product, and those then tend to be very big. So, for example, I work on Acrobat, and you have the native versus the web app and mobile apps, and so these things tend to have very massive groups in terms of who's working on the features. As with the legacy code base, I think Dave touched upon some of this. I think AI is kind of interesting because it's going to start pointing around some good and bad engineering decisions that you've made in terms of how you structure your code. I think if you write something new today, it's probably going to be really good with AI because it could basically start in a greenfield kind of way versus something that is decades old and has some not current decision making in its history, and then AI will struggle with that. So in terms of like where we are, I think we spent a lot of last year on kind of what I would like to think on like individualistic tinkering with AI, meaning everybody got tools and then people did stuff with it, and now we're asking, what stuff did you do? Is it actually productive? Can we now discuss how we scale that? And so a lot of the time that we're going to spend in 2026 is going to be around saying, well, let's try to scale the things that actually make people productive and defining what is productivity, how we measure it, and make it consistent. And so I think we're kind of at the beginning of that. I think Sentry is actually part of like what I'm going to be using to roll some of these things out. But I think how we roll out really depends on the age and the size of the code base that you have.
I think you kind of led us into sort of what I would say like the next section of this, and we talk a little bit about like the tools that we all use and the ways that we adopt things. I think what was really interesting to me about the last year is we've seen this gradual like growth of the capabilities of AI overall, but I think there's a really noticeable improvement, especially in like the second half of 2025, where the tools kind of went into overdrive, and we saw Codex came out from OpenAI and made a pretty big splash. We saw Claude Code start getting people to rethink how they actually like build software, and like kind of the return of like the CLI based coding approach. Cursor had some big gains. The models themselves changed. Like Codex as a model got better. We had Opus 4.5 drop. We had Composer from Cursor, and then integrations inside of there. And so there's been a lot of like change there, but the downstream of that is also really interesting. I'm sure Adobe's had changes in how AI is integrated inside of its products. We've watched, not to make this an entire Sentry show, but like the amount of capabilities we've added into Sentry from like a seer standpoint, and how we debug has rapidly changed as those models have changed. And so I think it's really interesting to think through like how the tool functionality growth has really like impacted the way that we all build software and the way we all use these tools. But on like the negative of that, I'd love to talk through like some of the kind of missed opportunities or the biggest miss that we all experienced, like using AI, and things that kind of went wrong along the way that we're hoping to watch out for as we cruise into 2026. We'll start off with Jose on that one, because you had some good insights just now on some areas. We'll start off with you and we'll move through. And everyone should feel free to jump in as much as they want. These conversations are always great when everyone jumps in. So feel free to take it away, Jose, and we'll see where I jump in.
Yeah, so I think in terms of, I wouldn't necessarily say misses, but it's a little bit of structure. I think a lot of people, I think someone even has a question there around writing like robust code using AI. I think that has been like the biggest miss, not just in an organization, but I think a lot of engineers, I think I've spoken with people and they have some kind of general bad thoughts or feedback in terms of AI writing code. And a lot of it has to do with, write me an app, and you're providing it completely like no structure, no context. And so I think when you look at something that is a bit of a black box, such as AI, I think the biggest miss has been setting up a phased approach in terms of what you expect the tool to do and how it contributes to your workflow. I think everybody's waiting to jump in on saying we don't need engineers anymore, or we don't need this role anymore, versus taking the approach of like, can we just make these people more productive, and making that be the focus, right? And so part of what I'm going to be doing this year is figuring out how we measure productivity, measure gains in that language of enabling productivity and kind of compounding the return of investment that we make on AI without the focus of, can you replace a role? Can you do that? I think the focus has to be, hey, I think you mentioned like this bug that's been around for 2 years. Someone solved it in 20 minutes. My goal is someone did a code review in 1 minute, because that's part of what, ironically, some of my goals are for this year, which is leveraging production data around errors. Can we have AI fix the easy ones? Like, I think AI is almost at that point where it could say, hey, like, fix type errors, fix these kind of errors that it should be able to do. And if it's not doing them, then you should say this model is horrible. We're not going to use that. Right. So like, I think we're at that point. I don't think we're at the point of like Adobe's able to go and say, hey, build me the new version of Photoshop. Like, I don't think we're, I don't think we're there. I don't think we're going to be there in quite some time. So I think people need to recalibrate, step back, and define, hey, there are 100 building blocks, right? But some are smaller and some are bigger. Let's give AI those really small ones because we know we could make sure that they're good, and let's keep people on the bigger ones. So sorry if I kind of went around, but I think that calibration of like what is expected and what you could depend on has been the biggest miss industry wide, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a really good call. It's really interesting too, because I think I saw this a lot in the first half of the year. And I think like the first half of the year, we were all still like enamored by like, this thing can go and build for us. And so you just go in and you ask it, go build thing. And then we're shocked when the thing that comes out like roughly looks like what we wanted, like the UI or the component, but ultimately is just kind of slopped together and it's very broken. But like, I think as we got into the latter part of the year, people started figuring out how to use plan functionality better to start scaffolding out ideas a little bit more. And I saw like as we got towards the end of the year, we started to focus a lot more on how we create better scale in individuals instead of looking at this as how do I go and stand up a bunch. It's how do I start orchestrating multiple things that I would normally have to do or normally want to do. And so like I'm hopeful as we go into 2026, like this will be a more of a focus. I definitely agree with you. Like first 3/4 of the year, I think either half to 3/4 of the year was a lot of like, cool, just go build things. But now we're getting to a place like, how do I do this a little bit more? How
do you contribute to a big code base, right? Like that's because we all know you can build a little prototype. I don't know, but Jose, maybe when you said, we can't build like Photoshop for you, I'm like, I wonder what version of Photoshop AI could it build Photoshop 1? Like maybe that's like a good like test we should have. Photoshop 2, I don't know.
It looked like you had something to say.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I think that one of the biggest challenge is the fact that like with AI, for example, you can get like in a very quick amount of time, you can get something that looks like 85 or 90% there, but actually like code and production readiness wise is probably like 20% in. And it's almost like creates this false expectation to product and design and other stakeholders where like, oh, it felt it was so close, but yet it's not. So I think like that's been a challenge sometimes, explaining like you can build a prototype very fast, but actually getting to a production state takes a bit longer.
Sorry, there's an interesting question here about what is the use cases that have been the most powerful. I mean, one interesting trend I've seen is sort of the AIs are so good at sort of like downloading a bunch of context around a piece of code or an issue quickly. That's one of the things where I've seen the biggest like productivity wins. Normally if you were going to venture into a part of a code base that maybe you were unfamiliar with, I mean, like maybe you're a principal engineer jumping from place to place, and you're like, I don't really know this code base, right? You don't have to ask these tools to make code. you can also ask them questions about the code, and they're really good at, just parsing all of that. I think debugging is the other side of this, that like when I think about all the time I've spent coding, when you're building code, all the context is loaded into your head. But oftentimes when you have to go debug a problem, like the first hour of debugging some problem is just trying to load all the context about who was calling what and what this means into your head. And then you can fix it in like 10 minutes. So often I feel like these tools are really powerful at just kind of the like initial kind of like context download. And so, debugging has been one of the things that's been pretty powerful, I think, with this. And, like I said, the 2-year-old bugs being just kind of like squashed quickly.
Yeah, I love that, because I think something is that I was talking to someone earlier today about this is it shocks me how, and I think it's as plan becomes more powerful and as people go through that process a little bit more than just running out to build something, how few people actually go in and use this as a tool to learn about the thing you're working in. Because I've used it with like our SDKs internally to go and learn a lot about like how tracing is wired up inside of them. And like even aside from just Sentry, just learning how these things work under the hood, it helps inform better questions. It helps me think better about design of things that I'm building and new software parts that I'm putting together. And so I think like the query engine of this, and again, getting into like the plan of like, how do I slow down a little bit? It's still going to be faster than going and doing it manually regardless, but spending that time to go and plan things out is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things I wanted to say in terms of like the ROI and use cases, I think someone put in here some of the stuff that we're actually doing. So I wrote and used Cursor to document code bases that were legacy, barely documented, and it did it so quickly, and then we were able to go in and review what it generated, make adjustments, and then what was very interesting is that then I said, why don't we create a script that will automatically update those documents when people check in more code. And so I think, not to say that this is what you should be doing, but this is the level of helpfulness that will probably integrate into your code base almost immediately, because there's almost no reason, and it's not going to hurt your code base, right? Because it's going to be generating markdown files. You're not going to have production issues, and you can start trusting what you build, right? Because it's just going to write a Python script, generate some markdown, and it's going to make you a little bit more productive. And ironically, generate data that then your sub-agents that you generate later could leverage to build stuff. So, I think, somebody's asking about like, what are some of the steps or things you could do, is actually defining those building blocks that you will need for later on and doing them now. Because if you don't, it's going to be harder for you to go and say, hey, I want this to now build features for me. If you can't even just write a test or write documentation, what are the odds that it could actually build a feature for you, right? And so I think that those are the things people really need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I was going to add to that, Jose, as well as like the you had the example kind of creating documentation for code, I assume APIs and this type of stuff, for example, or beyond it as well. Like yesterday I had an example where I had a piece of code, for example. It was less documentation for engineers, but I wanted to produce documentation for customers on how to run some integration steps manually. Like I had basically code that basically automates the integration, but if the user doesn't want to give like service account access to us, for example, they can do a bunch of steps manually. But just looking at the code, we were able to like produce kind of the steps on like, oh, this is what you need to do in GCP and X and YZ tool. That was super useful. For me, the one of the main benefits has been kind of automating all the mundane, boring stuff that I don't want to do, or making it faster. So for example, like, oh, like here's my code, and like, well, I want to move constants to a constants module, and I want to extract these utilities into a utility module, and please see if there's something in the code base that already exists that I should be using, and then voila, you get to something much more production ready way faster, which has been really helpful. But obviously, like we didn't talk about feature generation, but obviously these tools are very good for just generating new features as well. I think where it usually stumbles is kind of the if you have a large code base and a lot of like bespoke logic, it will get lost and start making mistakes, and then you probably have to start reading the code yourself anyway.
Yeah, Dave, I want to throw a little bit of a curveball question at you, and thinking about like somebody who runs a number of engineering teams, has a pretty sizable engineering organization yourself. When somebody talks about a way that they're using AI, what's one of those that really excites you? Like as a leader, when you hear like somebody says, oh, I used it in this way to do this thing, what's one that really like you're like, man, that's a really, I'm excited to hear you're actually doing it that way. Like, tell me about one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just get excited when people get excited, right? But it's possible the other day that somebody who I won't name was like, I don't think I'll ever write documentation again. Do you know what I mean? After trying to build some documentation with AI. So no, I mean, I think also I get excited when people can sort of speed run the prototyping part of the process, because as you know, Cody, like, I mean, a lot of startups and smaller companies especially are struggling. I mean, they're struggling with like product market fit. And it's kind of, there's all this like lean startup stuff about, only build the sort of surface area that you need to sort of first get it in front of customers and then figure out what buttons they're going to click on and build those buttons, right? Even our design team, which might have done something in the past in Figma as a draft, is like now just like working with an engineering team or themselves, even just like building a really quick prototype of something to figure out how some interactions will work. So a lot of times, at Sentry, we're trying to build new things and iterate on product market fit, which, might not be as relevant for like a big established company, but the ability to do that really quickly and not spend like a month on version 1 is very exciting to me.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned the example of design team basically using AI for creating prototypes and stuff. Like not at Unity, but one of the startups that I work with, like the product management was essentially using like, I think Lovable or Claude Code or something like that to basically build the prototypes for the features that they wanted, and then they would do like a voiceover video narration, for example, talking about the features, and then based on the narration and the feature and the video and everything, it basically created a PRD with the requirements and stuff for the engineering to basically take on. I'm like, okay, please go and execute this vision that I have in mind. And I think that was really cool use of AI that I saw myself. Obviously, downsides there as well is like sometimes some of these tools that were built by product management were taken into production use directly, and then there were some bigger holes in security-wise, but like at the same time, productivity-wise, it was very useful.
And luckily, localhost is not accessible everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think for me, in terms of what excites me, just to get a little bit more technical, is kind of the rapid iteration and adoption of agents. I think when you go back to last year, before summer, that really wasn't part of the vocabulary when it came to what we were doing. And it's a large part of what we're going to be doing this year. And what excites me about it is that in terms of AI, a lot of things have been very singularly done, meaning you're talking to OpenAI, you're talking to Claude, you're doing this, and it does that for you, right? The new agentic workflows allow you to define and serialize decision making and expertise, and potentially disseminate that across teams. And I think that that's the part that gets me a little bit excited, because you could imagine that, and I think we'll discover whether this is good or bad, but you could start serializing domain knowledge expertise, where you could have an agent that specializes around your UI framework, one that specializes around security. And then when you're making a change or you're writing a feature, you could tell these agents, hey, check this out. And when this person is done, you review it. And when they're done, you review it. And it kind of goes into the whole, like, if you tell AI to do something 10 times, eventually we'll get it right. But if you could compound that with the different kind of hats that a team would have, with the ability to kind of serialize some of that, I think it starts becoming a little bit powerful. But again, it goes back to the way to compound it is to define building blocks that actually add value and not detract value.
Are you doing this society today, or is this like more speculative in terms of what would be useful in the future?
So we're starting to use some of that today. I think the analysis that we're trying to do is around which flavor we want to do. So, Claude is very tied to this kind of CLI runtime aspect, versus Cursor allows you to define it in a way that's actually more friendly to run in the IDE. They become kind of more like scripts that you could run. And so they kind of work a little bit different, but they all have their own advantages. There are no disadvantages. And so, again, part of what I'm trying to do is figure out how that becomes productive as a team and an organization, and how we set up the part where we continuously serialize what you learn, right? Because that's basically what gets lost right now. If I create an agent and we deploy it, and that agent runs for 1 month, but it never gets updated, that agent will eventually become obsolete, right? And so that's part of the things that we're looking at on how do we improve that, or maybe Claude and OpenAI will figure that out for us, right? But that's part of the element that I'm hoping we could solve, because then you could really deploy and scale them. I think if they become stale, then it makes no point to really deploy them, because within a couple of months your code base will change. Your code base will change so much that that original context will become obsolete.
Yeah, I think you've all hit on something that like I'm pretty passionate about. It's like this idea of creating like the amount of scale we can create in individuals now, and the amount of things you can have your deep domain knowledge in something. Like a designer can be a very, very good, great designer, but now they can start to like expand their scope and their impact radius as far as they want, right? Like these areas are things they can dabble in. They can prototype ideas out. They can bring real mocks to their review cycles to go and like actually have checked out, instead of just building them out in Figma if they want to, right? Like they can go a lot deeper. You can have a product manager who's also able to go out and prototype the V1 of the feature, can use AI to pull down customer insight stuff. All these things can be happening at the same time. You can be debugging problems while you're building new features. And I think like creating better scale in individuals is something that's really exciting. And that brings me to kind of my next thing I wanted to talk a little bit through. And that's when we think about like how we pick these tools and the ROI we get out of them. I want to talk with each of you a little bit about this one. This one I'd love for everyone to answer. When you think of, when someone comes up and says, hey, there's a new tool I want you to check out, how do you determine like if that was one that was really like worth digging further into? You take it for a spin and you want to keep using it. Like what are the things you're looking for, and the things that you found really move the needle for your organization internally, both your workflow and as you like recommend it to your teams and start rolling it out to teams? Yona, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. Like I think I'm gonna use the example from Layer, for example. So I think what we used to do, like when we're like looking into different kind of tooling, is like I wanted people to, well, I gave them the company credit card and say, go use whatever tooling you can find that you think will add value to your workflow, essentially. And I'll give you 2 weeks, and then at the end of 2 weeks, we'll all get together for a couple of hours, and I expect everybody to give a presentation on the tooling that they used. We got together, and then obviously based on the feedback, then we took another week basically to try the tooling that everybody found useful, and then based on that, we like basically aligned on like which are the ones that we're going to actually procure. So let's say it's not a very quantitative way of actually measuring like, okay, which one produced the most value, more qualitative, I guess, in this regard. But then obviously, I mean, that's kind of how we ended up with some of the tools that we used there. So I think that was very useful, kind of like a community effort in a way.
Jose, what about you?
Yeah, so we can't do that at a company this big. So it's a little bit more complicated. It also depends on the tool. But yeah, a lot of it, we do have the ability to individually analyze certain things, but in terms of even pushing for adoption, especially with AI in particular, that really has to come almost like top down in terms of what we're getting licenses for, because our company is so big. So I think you guys know that. So it works a little bit different for us. So, but it doesn't mean that we can't go and ask for a license or a trial or something. In fact, I mean, we ended up adopting Sentry was me looking at it and working with some of your team to do a trial. So we're able to do some of that. But when it comes to the broader rollout and adoption, you will go through the same process that you would expect a 40-year-old company to go through in terms of procurement. So
yeah, no, I can 100% empathize with you. At Unity, it's the procurement process and going through legal and security reviews and all this type of stuff. So when you want to use a tool, you really want to use it because going through the process is just like a pain in the ass.
yeah.
We actually sort of started maybe more big company conservative on this than you might expect. With a little bit like, well, let's not do too much. Let's make sure everything's approved. But I would say probably, I don't know, maybe even a year ago, we really realized the importance of letting people try out all this stuff and went to a much more open sort of freewheeling model of like, you need to spend some money, let's, just get it going. And I think it is hard to measure the impact of all this. I mean, developer productivity is famously hard to measure anyway. And I don't think AI tools really changes that much. I mean, if anything, some of the traditional like bad metrics that you might look at, like number of PRs and amount of lines of code you added. I mean, first of all, we all know these are trash already. And we now know that somebody can like add 100,000 lines of code to a code base like in a week. And it might not be for the better, right? I mean, large code bases are liabilities, not assets in and of themselves. So, but yeah, we've been pretty freewheeling lately about letting people try out a lot of things. And we just have like, as coding knows, like we have like big Slack channels where people just kind of talk about like, hey, like what's working, what's not. I tried this, I tried that. But it is funny to me in a way how much everybody kind of has their own preferred flavor. And there's certain people that are like, oh, I think Model A is better than Model B, or Model B is better than Model C. And it's definitely not like internally consistent about what everybody thinks. It's kind of just like what's working for you. So I don't know, maybe there'll be some convergence over time, but with the rate that the models are changing, I don't know. We don't worry about that as much as sort of just like, what are the actual methodologies? And that's where I think I was really interested to hear Jose mention the idea of trying to start running some automations, you know what I mean? Where, it's not just a REPL, with a developer running one of these tools or integrated into an IDE. You're starting to get to the point where you have a behavior and you want it to continuously happen, and you're trying to figure out how to actually automate that. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in this coming year.
Question to you, Dave. You mentioned about kind of having a more uniform kind of AI adoption across the company in the next year. Well, this year, I guess.
Yeah, this year, yeah.
This year, because it's 2026. But like, I was curious, like, if you're doing anything with your organization to like promote AI use, because obviously you're tracking if you know that there's kind of some kind of distribution of AI usage, because like back in the startup, for example, I made it like an evaluation criteria in a way where like I'm expecting people to use the AI tooling, for example, or try to adopt it because we're an AI company and whatnot.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you guys are doing anything in that regard.
Yeah, we are. I mean, Sentry does an amazing hackathon every year, which already last fall kind of like, it was definitely encouraged to try to, explore the AI tools as part of the hackathon. But actually this year, it's your question's timely because coming up, we're doing a like 2 or 3 day, I think we're still figuring it out, but we're doing like an all of engineering. I don't know. It's not a hackathon really, because the point isn't hacks, right? But it's a process where we're going to have the people that are, again, the tip of the spear people give some talks to the organization. Teams are going to work together to try to do things like, I see a lot of comments. People ask, how do you deal with large code bases? These Claude MD files or other markdown files. I mean, teams are going to work to try to put like good signposting into their code bases for agents to work with, and we're going to do some lessons learned there. So yeah, we have like a drop your pencils.
Yeah.
We're going to spend a few days working on making these tools work well for us. It's like an explicit, company-wide thing.
Kind of like a combination of educating the rest of the folks, but also spotlighting desired behaviors. Like, hey, like if you are at the frontier, basically pushing this tooling and like telling everybody else what to do, you get this opportunity to basically show your seniority and all this type of stuff, right?
Absolutely. Or show your juniority, because sometimes it's the people that are, a year out of school that have just like jumped into this and like figured out how to make it work. So, so that's awesome too.
Yeah.
I think it's like a very positive culture like thing about, and I think like organizations that start leading with this, like we, David Kramer, the co-founder of Sentry, he vibe coded together this tool that looks at like token usage, takes in all of our billing data from the different ones and shows like who in the company is like using the most tokens, right? And the questions weren't like, God, Cody, why are you spending this much? Or, Joe, why are you costing us so much in tokens? It was what tricks are you guys picking up out of this and using? And the amount of calls that came out when that list came out of like, hey, show me how you're doing this. I want to learn more. And I think it's like a really a positive inspiration thing. Like, how do we teach people how to go and use these in like really effective ways and ineffective ways? Like, what are some of the ways that have like led you down some of the scary paths of like, I broke a thing in prod because I built it this way. Like, how do we teach people to avoid that stuff? And I think it's a really, really, a really cool thing. But I think it does bring us to like another topic as we think about the upcoming year. What are some of the areas that you are worried about AI impacting and that you have a little bit more? I think we're all pretty leaned forward on it. We want to see this grow inside of our organizations, but what are areas that you are a little scared of or a little bit concerned about as it looks at like the development process, and like areas you want to make sure are treated with a little bit more care than just tossing some generated code out into it? I'll start with Jose.
I think that there are many, but I think primarily it's one, which is that I expect this year to be the year that it actually writes code that people want to ship into production. But I think the area that I foresee being the most problematic is whether it will do it in a way that complies with how you normally write code and whether the code is secure. I think being in a position where you're asking someone that's not necessarily part of your company to write something for your company does become a bit of the issue here. And so figuring out how to feel comfortable with that, but also making sure that you have the right checks and balances to do that, it becomes kind of the area, not of concern, but I think it's the challenge that will really ultimately define how much more productive you could be as an organization, right? So can you say, hey, stand up a new API endpoint that returns X from this table? And if it could do that in a way where you feel comfortable shipping that into production, that becomes super powerful, right? Can it do that today? I would say no. I think it could do some of it, and then you have to go through and make sure that it has all the right things that it would need to do. And I think we all work at very big companies where you are not necessarily looking at a singular code base in terms of how you ship and you distribute something. And so I think solving those challenges of how does a CSP change actually get distributed and propagated, because it might not be in the same code base, but you're going to make a change that does both. How do you orchestrate that, right? And I think that in itself becomes the part where I don't think I'm concerned. I think it just becomes the biggest challenge to unlock that productivity. And that's why I said you're stuck with the smaller building blocks that you could manage, but you still need all that people power still to do everything, because you're still needing that orchestration layer.
If I could follow up on that, actually, as you speak to that, it really makes me just also think about test suite quality as a huge driver in how much you can trust code. And I've worked on projects in the past that have had like no test suites, and I've worked on projects in the past where we spent 4 years building the best possible testing environment in the world. And in the latter case, I remember we used to say like, hey, it would be fine if we had like any intern come in on their first day, we would feel comfortable with them committing code to the code base, because we know that if they messed it up, the test suite would fix it, right? Mm-hmm. And so it makes me think in general, like, what are the more and less testable parts of a program? And I guess, there's a lot of more nuanced answers, but at a super high level, like UIs are kind of like hard to test, and like backends are kind of easy to test often, right? Because there's like a set of like fixed properties that you want to hold on a backend. And so I think if there are like, properties of your system or strong test suites that you can have for like this API always returns the value that we put in it, those are the places where I feel like I'm optimistic that we can be a little bit more like aggressive with letting AIs go, make that set of improvements, knowing that we're sort of confident in the test suite. Again, I guess UI testing is sort of famously hard to define a correctness criteria for. So that's hard, but that's one of the big, that's kind of, I don't know, one of the big sort of optimisms I have, I guess, right? Is that maybe if there's a place where you really can define good tests, we'll be able to take a lot of steps and execute big plans and take big swings at code bases. So.
What about you, Yonar? Where are you worried about inside of all this? I think worry is probably a strong word in this case.
There's a worry for sure.
Never mind. Oh.
There's worry for sure. I think security. I mean, that also security, but I'm not going to expand on that. I guess the biggest issue is that these AI tools don't generally necessarily consider too much of the security. Sometimes, obviously, if you use like code review tools and stuff, it will tell you like, hey, maybe you should have protection here for these environment variables because otherwise you will write stuff into production or whatever. But I think like this is more of a existential topic, I guess, but like I'll make it more code specific. Is like code literacy and then also critical thinking, where today we're not in a place where, I mean, most people who work in engineering and software have reviewed a bunch of code, they read code. But there's a new wave of AI engineering essentially, where we produce codes based on like natural language essentially, but we might not be able to actually fully understand the code that gets produced. And especially if you're reviewing somebody else's code, we just rely on the AI telling us whether it's correct or not, without actually having the human intervention, where the human becomes basically a checkbox clicker. It's like, looks good to me, looks good to me. And that's how issues end up in production. And not necessarily even issues, often issues. But in many cases, the example of Dave, like, we can produce 10,000 lines of code, but maybe no lines of code had to be produced because critical thinking wasn't actually employed at the right place. And I think another thing which relates to this as well is that because it becomes ever so easier to add features, we question less whether those features should even be added, because it's just easy to keep adding more and more craft and more features instead of thinking like what is actually necessary for the product to be good and functional. So I think and then obviously that the existential crisis, the existential topic there is like this expands to obviously like way more into like writing TDDs or writing PRDs or essentially even critical thinking in general in society.
Not only that, is if something breaks in production, right?
Yeah.
And you need to go and jump, who's going to be quicker, a human that knows the code or you writing a prompt to AI, right? So yeah. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I worry a lot about curiosity atrophy. I think we can ask for things, we get a quick response, but the want to go and like learn how this stuff works. To your point, Jose, like to learn the code base and to know how, for us, like Dave, like how Sentry works under the hood. How does ingestion work? How do we move things through? How does Seer go and debug the things that it does? Like the want to go and learn that stuff gets deprioritized because it's just so easy to go and ask for it to go and do the thing. And so I think being really intentional about fostering curiosity in people and teaching people how to do like the research and plan phases and like, is a PRD really written good, and do they really understand the PRD, or did they generate the PRD also, which is not the point. Like all of those things.
I mean, just to be contrary though, I mean, I think the AI can be an unbelievable tool for curiosity.
Totally.
I mean, again, if I was a new grad being brought into a 10, 15-year-old code base, like, I mean, I would be like, traditionally, you'd be like, well, it's going to be a few years till I kind of know my way around. But I mean, man, I don't want to distract this senior engineer who wrote this thing. Do you know what I mean? But it's like now you can kind of dive in, and I mean, you could spend a few days just like I said, asking questions. You don't have to be kind of like adding slop to the code base. You can use these things to kind of navigate quickly. And so I kind of feel like the people who are intrinsically curious have found, at least in our team, I've seen them find lots of amazing ways to figure things out and be curious with the tools. So.
Another this is more of like a shower/bed thought, which has been like daunting me, or I've been thinking about sometimes, is kind of like, how will tech evolve now that AI is in place? Because all of these LLMs have been trained based on existing material that's out there in the internet. So I'm taking like a more practical example. Let's say take React, for example. So if you're building UI, it's going to be amazing if you're using React and LLMs to produce code and so forth, because it has examples and best practices, documentation and everything. But then what incentive there is to build another framework or build another component library, because that material doesn't exist in the internet. So even if practically that tooling would be faster or better, there's not enough material out there where how do you say it, like the LLMs will not produce as quality of a code anymore compared to like some historical stack, for example. So I'm wondering like how that bridge will get like crossed eventually, right?
If you need a React app with a gradient purple, you're good. Like
Yeah.
and we should just never do any other gradients
Yeah,
now,
but-
because like
They take an example of this more bespoke language like Elm for frontend, for example. Like you probably like these LLMs will not produce great quality code when it comes to some very bespoke language, but in the future, if there's some new development and stuff, how will these LLMs actually like perform?
Yeah, definitely not as well. But I don't know. They're making. I mean, there's been some math proofs and stuff, but you're right. I do think it's harder to build a first of its kind thing with an LLM. You know what I mean? You'd need a really good plan yourself, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to cruise into a couple of Q&As, and then we'll close out probably the last 3 minutes with a speed round of predictions for next year. But we got a lot of questions that have come through. I like this one here. I'm gonna go ahead and just ask it out, and we'll take quick answers on these so we can get through a bunch of them. We had what should a junior or mid-level engineer focus on to amplify value? And I think framing this inside of like in this world of AI things, what should they focus on? First one who wants to jump in on that, go for it.
I guess I can quickly like say my thoughts. I think like get very good at prompt engineering and be willing to change your kind of not opinion, but kind of your perspective of what can be prompted, because a lot of the things that you could prompt in, say, a year ago, you would never get anywhere good. But today, these like language models are way more performant. So you can go more abstract over time as these large language models improve.
I think for me, there are two ways of answering that. So, because the questions are around their value. So one would be around the value they generate to the company. So it would be to leverage a tool to get consistent results and do it better than anyone else. And I think junior engineers are probably more equipped to try stuff and know how to do trial and error until they get some consistency with the prompt. And I think that will really shine right now in an organization. I think in terms of your own value, you want to get back, I think something either Dave or Jonah said, in terms of like reasoning with documents and stuff like that. Get really good at using AI to figure out how the entire code base works. Because I think one of the parts that's being lost right now is once you start automating all these other things, how do you go from an entry-level engineer to a senior engineer if you're basically going to be prompting away? Because in theory, everyone could be very, very curious and you learn, but can you actually reason with the code base? And I think that would be a very key area where you start learning. If you're a front-end engineer, you learn how the APIs actually work and why they work that way. And so don't want to get winded, but I think that there are two ways of looking at that, which is the output value and kind of the input value to yourself.
I'll maybe append very briefly to that as well, to the output value in essence, right? I talk about prompt engineering, it's a very specific skill set that you can get good at. But I think from junior, mid-level to senior or beyond to like staff and principal levels, I think it becomes less about the code output and it becomes more of this convergence of roles where historically we used to have like infrastructure engineers, database engineers, backend engineers, front-end engineers, and so forth, and even QA, right? And then eventually, like a lot of these roles got collated into what we now call like a full stack engineer, right? But with the use of like AI tools, I think like what's happening now is there's a lot of convergence of full stack engineer design and product into, we can call it like a product engineer in some regard, where you're expected to kind of like be a product owner, part designer, and also an engineer, because now you have all these productivity tools. So I think another thing that's very important, if you want to like ascend the technical ranks, essentially, is like having curiosity also towards the product and design and the end goal in mind, not just the technical side of things.
Yeah, I won't add too much. I mean, I think with the AI slant, just to kind of sum up some of what these guys said, like I think when you use some of these tools, they'll do a plan and then they'll write the code. Figure out how to tell the difference between a good plan and a bad plan.
Yeah.
And that means knowing your code base. It means knowing your corporate goals. It means all of that. But I think if you're a junior or mid-level engineer who who can really understand the difference between that was a good plan and a bad plan for the agent, that would be a pretty powerful position to be in.
Now, this one, I grabbed this one for a specific reason. I want to talk to Jose a little bit about this, and it's really like, how are we handling PRs at this point? And there's a deeper question here that I want to like unpack. So I think the way we debug software is changing a lot. And like obviously, we have a stake in this in the sense of what Sentry does and how we're looking at the problem space overall. But Jose, I think you have some interesting ways that you guys are debugging problems. You may or may not be using the code review components of Seer at this point, but you're using Seer in some interesting ways. And so love to hear from everyone, like how are we talking about like some of these baseline engineering tasks of like PRs, bringing code into the code base, reviews, how does all that stuff play out? But then also just wider, how are we debugging software now?
Yeah, so I think I have a couple of interesting examples, and I'll try to be quick. So I think one is around some of the tooling that we just wrote. So like I said, I leverage AI to document a code base, and actually then help me write a test suite to make sure that what the code that was written and the documentations match up, and whenever you make a change, they both get updated. And that actually is part of our flow for one of our particular code base. And I think that in itself is like super productive, because you get an automation where you get this script that will review a PR. It assesses a certain risk value. It tells you how you should test your code. And then the reviewer could view this, and then they will have more signal on whether this is an easy ship it, or this is I need to probably spend a couple hours reviewing this. And so I think that in itself is a really big one. The other one is kind of what we're trying to bring in right now. So, we're using Sentry to collect production errors. And obviously that in itself should be informing how we are able to fix that. And so one of the things that we trial late last year was leveraging the Sentry MCP server so that we could use a tool like Cursor to prompt what are the current issues in production, and then create a PR with the fix and document that. And so part of what we're trying to do this year, and kind of going back to the building blocks, is to create a filter in terms of what are the issues that we feel comfortable having like automated PRs drafted based on the Sentry data, and then a workflow that will allow the engineer to review it and approve it and merge it into the code base. And so our goal is to eventually have almost no what we call like low line or like low level production issues. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most excited about. And I think the other part that we're looking at it, like I discussed before, is kind of the agentic approach in terms of creating more expertise and then incorporating that into the workflow that would actually be PR. All right, like you could imagine that you're going to have a security agent, that you're going to have a UI agent, and whenever you get a PR, they would at least post some sort of comment that lets a real human say, all right, well, I would have said that. So AI said, and hopefully this person already made those changes, right? And so I think that's the part that we're hoping to get to and measure.
Yona, what about you all?
On our side, like we have, I think on the code review tooling, we have different ones. I don't remember exactly which ones are there. I think something from GitHub, Copilot, I guess. And then I think I've used like CodeRapid in the past before. So those have been very useful as like reviewing tools. Like I just came back, as you know, Sentry just released the code review tool as well. So something that we might look into as well. But yeah, I mean, like beyond that, like reviewing wise, code review wise, like not using much beyond that.
Awesome. We are about 2 minutes out from the end, so I want to speed round predictions real fast. So kind of one liner predictions real fast, and then we'll cruise out for it. So Dave, what's your 2026 AI hot take?
One liner? Oh, that's so hard.
Give me three liners.
Oh, we all do. I mean, I guess what I'm looking for, I feel like there's a disconnect right now between, with big code bases, we know how to use AI tools to try to make an incremental change like PR. It's a delta, right? We also know how to use AI tools to basically like one shot a whole app into existence. I'm really looking forward to kind of all the exploration that happens around tooling that kind of bridges that gap, and that lets us essentially write like a significant scale PRD or something like that, and then compile that into a large scale app. And then maybe like make changes to that PRD, and maybe there's some technology that allows more incremental compilation, so to speak, of the spec into the actual written code. But I think this is possible. This is on the frontier, and I'm really looking forward to being able to build sort of non-plaything scale apps, you know, in one click with AI. So that's something that I'll be keeping a very careful eye on in 2026.
I like it. Yona, you're up.
Something super integrated that somehow integrates Slack and Google Docs and different document sources as I'm writing code, so it can tell me if there's changes to specs or some relevant communication to feature that I'm specifically working on at a given point in time. That would be amazing.
I love it. Jose?
I think keeping with the agent workflow, I think I would love to see, I'm not saying I would love to see, I think we will get to like a high level of concurrency with agents that will actually get us to the productivity that we expect AI to be. I think the question would be, how expensive will that be? But I really think with whatever everyone's trying out with agents, I think things will standardize and it'll be something that will compound. And I think will be kind of the biggest win that we get from AI this year.
Awesome. Well, we are at time. This was a blast, guys. I really enjoyed this. This was a ton of fun. We had a lot of questions that we unfortunately didn't get through. So we have to run this back sometime in the future and get you guys back here to talk with us some more. But I know I really appreciate you coming through and talking to us about what you're doing at Unity and Adobe. And Dave, thanks for taking the time to talk a little bit more about Sentry. So this was great, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks very much.
Have a great one.